The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps trapped in glass cages. Maribel Cross gripped the worn leather handle of her wheelchair's armrest, knuckles going white. The checkout line crawled forward. A scanner beeped somewhere ahead, out of rhythm, like a heartbeat that couldn't find its pace. Ranger sat motionless at her left side. The aging German shepherd's sable coat caught the harsh light. His eyes tracked movement without his head turning. 11 years of training lived in that stillness. The military cap on Maribel's head had faded from desert tan to something softer. 73 years of living had carved deep lines into her face, each one earned. Her olive jacket hung loose on shoulders that once carried 60 pounds of gear through places most Americans only saw on the news. Behind her, someone exhaled. Loud, deliberate. You gonna sit there all day? The words hit like shrapnel. Not shouted. Worse. Spoken with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. Maribel didn't turn around. She had learned decades ago that reacting too fast invited escalation. Ranger's ears rotated backward, but his body remained still. Waiting, always waiting for her signal. A cart bumped into the back of her wheelchair. I said, "Are you gonna move?" 3 people in line turned to look. A woman in a store apron froze mid-step near the bread aisle, her mouth falling open. A man with a toddler in his cart suddenly became very interested in his phone. Nobody spoke. That silence. Maribel knew it like she knew her own heartbeat. She had worn it in VA waiting rooms when clerks sighed at her paperwork. In parking lots when strangers stared at her wheelchair lift like it was a personal inconvenience. In restaurants when servers asked her companion what she wanted to eat, as if her legs being broken meant her mouth stopped working. The cart hit her wheelchair again. Harder this time. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Now she turned. The man was built like a refrigerator someone had stuffed into a black t-shirt. Mid-40s. Thick neck. Arms that said he spent more time at the gym than anywhere else. His face had gone red, the kind of red that comes from anger held too long and released too often. His name tag caught the light. Clint Rowe, assistant manager. He smirked when he saw her face. Well, he saw the age, the wheelchair, the military cap. "Figures," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Of course it's one of you." Maribel felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, something older, something with teeth. Ranger remained seated, but his weight shifted almost imperceptibly forward. Clint leaned down, bringing his face closer to hers. His finger came up, pointing directly at her nose. Close enough that she could smell the energy drink on his breath. Close enough that the invasion of space became its own kind of violence. "You people always want special treatment," he said, his voice dropping to something intimate and ugly. "Handicap parking. Service dogs in stores. Everyone else has to wait while you take your sweet time." The cashier, a young woman named Destiny according to her badge, looked up with wide eyes. "Sir, maybe we could." Clint didn't even glance at her. "I'm handling it." He said the way someone talks about taking out trash. Maribel watched his hand. The pointing finger, the way it jabbed the air inches from her face. She watched the tendons flex in his forearm, the casual cruelty in his posture. She had seen that posture before. Different men, different decades, same energy. "I served 26 years, Clint continued, straightening up but not backing away. 26 years keeping this country safe. What did you do to deserve all this?" He gestured at Ranger, at the wheelchair, at everything about her existence that inconvenienced him. The question was bait. Maribel recognized it the way a demolitions expert recognizes a tripwire. She could answer. She could tell him about the convoy, about the IED that killed 3 of her friends and left her bleeding in the sand, about the surgeries, the infections, the months of learning to live in a body that had betrayed her. She could tell him that she had 31 years of service to his 26, that she had earned her wheelchair in a war he probably watched on television. But she didn't. "Please don't touch my dog," she said. Her voice came out calm, almost gentle, the kind of calm that comes from having survived things that would break most people. It unsettled him. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened. "What did you just say to me?" "I said, please don't touch my dog." Clint laughed, but it came out wrong. Too sharp. Too forced. I'm not scared of a dog, sweetheart. Ranger stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, controlled. He didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth. He simply rose from his seated position and placed his body half a step in front of Maribel's wheelchair. Not aggressive, protective. The difference mattered. A ripple passed through the nearby customers. The woman in the apron took an unconscious step backward. The man with the toddler finally looked up from his phone. Clint's smirk flickered. He took a step back before he could stop himself. Ranger didn't move again. Didn't need to. The statement had been made. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The scanner continued its irregular beeping. The fluorescent lights continued their angry hum. Somewhere in the back of the store, a pallet jack scraped across concrete. Destiny's hands trembled as she finished scanning the last item. "That'll be $47.62, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maribel reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her wallet. She paid with a card, waited for the receipt, thanked the cashier by name. She did not look at Clint again. As she wheeled toward the exit, her arms burning with the effort, she heard his voice rise behind her. Unbelievable. They'll let anyone in these days. No respect. No consideration for real Americans. The automatic doors slid open. Cold air hit her face. Outside, Maribel stopped beside her van. Her hands trembled on the wheelchair rims. Not from fear, from something that lived deeper than fear. Something that had been waiting a very long time. Ranger pressed his head against her thigh. She looked down at him, at his gray muzzle, at the eyes that had watched her through her worst days and never judged. "I know," she said quietly. "I know." She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a number she had been waiting to call for 6 months. The voice that answered was crisp, professional, expectant. "Ms. Cross, we've been waiting for your assessment." Maribel looked back at the store, at the sliding doors, at the fluorescent glow bleeding through the windows. "Schedule the audit," she said. "This location is worse than we thought." She ended the call. Ranger's ears perked forward, because somewhere inside that store, a man named Clint Rowe was about to have the worst 2 weeks of his life. And he had absolutely no idea it was coming. What would you do if someone humiliated you in public, never knowing you held the power to end their entire career? Drop your thoughts below, and make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Clint Rowe watched the old woman wheel herself out of his store and felt satisfaction settle into his chest like warm whiskey. He straightened his name tag, smoothed down his shirt, turned back to the checkout area with the expression of a man who had just handled a problem. "Back to work," he said to no one in particular. "Show's over." Destiny kept her eyes on her register. Her hands still trembled slightly as she greeted the next customer. The woman in the apron, her name was Carolyn, and she had worked at this store for 11 years, disappeared into the bread aisle without a word. Nobody met Clint's eyes. That was how he liked it. He walked the floor for the next hour, finding small failures everywhere. A crooked price tag in produce. A scuff mark on the floor near dairy. An employee who took 32 minutes for lunch instead of 30. Each one became an opportunity, a chance to lean in, to lower his voice, to remind people who ran this building. By 3 o'clock, he had made 2 cashiers cry and sent 1 stalker home early without pay. By 4 o'clock, he had forgotten about the old woman entirely. But the store hadn't forgotten. In the break room, whispers traveled like electricity through water. Carolyn told Marcus in frozen foods. Marcus told Destiny during shift change. Destiny told the new girl, Shanice, who had only been working there for 2 weeks and was already looking for another job. Did you see how close he got her face? She was in a wheelchair. A wheelchair. And that dog just stood up. Didn't bark or nothing. Just stood up. Man's gonna get himself bit one day. Man's gonna get himself worse than bit. The last comment came from Jerome, who had worked the night shift for 7 years and had seen Clint reduce grown men to tears. He said it quietly, almost to himself, but Shanice heard it. "What do you mean worse?" Jerome shook his head. "Nothing. Just saying. You treat people like that long enough, eventually you treat the wrong person." She was just some old lady in a wheelchair. Jerome looked at Shanice for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. "My grandmother was in a wheelchair," he said. Last 8 years of her life. Know what she did before that? Shanice shook her head. Ran a hospital, 300 employees, 12 departments. She hired people, fired people, built a cancer wing from the ground up. He paused. People looked at her in that chair and saw a helpless old woman. They were wrong. The break room went quiet. Outside, the afternoon rush began. Cars filled the parking lot. Shopping carts rattled across asphalt. The ordinary machinery of commerce continued its endless grinding. But something had changed. The employees moved differently, spoke more carefully, watched Clint with eyes that held something new. Not respect, anticipation. Clint noticed none of it. He stood near the customer service desk at 5:15, checking his phone when the district coordinator called. Rose speaking. Clint, this is Patricia from Regional. We're scheduling a compliance visit for your location. He rolled his eyes. When? 2 weeks. Maybe sooner. We'll confirm. What's this about? A pause. Longer than normal. Routine audit. Nothing to worry about. I'm not worried. Good. Keep your documentation current. We'll be looking at everything. The line went dead. Clint stared at his phone for a moment, then shrugged. He had survived a dozen audits. Passed every one. The trick was simple. Keep the numbers clean, keep the employees scared, and keep the complaints buried. He was good at burying complaints. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the woman on the phone had not made the call voluntarily. Patricia had received her own call that morning. From someone higher. Much higher. Someone who asked very specific questions about the store on Riverside Drive and its assistant manager. Someone who already knew the answers. The machinery was already moving. 6 days later, an envelope arrived at corporate headquarters. No return address. Inside, a flash drive containing 18 months of security footage, internal emails, and a spreadsheet documenting every complaint filed against Clint Rowe. 47 complaints. 47. 23 from customers. 19 from employees. 5 from vendors who refused to service the location unless Clint was absent. Every single one had been marked resolved in the system. None of them had actually been resolved. The woman who opened that envelope was named Vivian Torres. She had worked in corporate compliance for 22 years. She had seen theft, fraud, harassment. She thought nothing could surprise her anymore. She was wrong. By the end of that day, Vivian had made 4 phone calls. The first was to legal. The second was to human resources. The third was to the district manager. The fourth was to a number she had never dialed before. A direct line to the head of corporate operations. I have something you need to see, she said. It's about the Riverside location. Which one? We have 3. The one with Clint Rowe. A long pause. Send everything to my office. Tonight. There's more. The person who sent this information? They included a note. What does it say? Vivian looked at the single sheet of paper that had accompanied the flash drive. The handwriting was precise. Military precise. It says, I'll be conducting the audit personally. Expect me in 12 days. Another pause. This one felt different. Who has that kind of authority? Vivian checked the signature at the bottom of the note. Read it twice. Then read it a third time because she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Someone way above both of us, she said quietly. Someone who apparently has been watching this door for a very long time. The name on that note would change everything. But for now, Clint Rowe went home to his apartment, microwaved a frozen dinner, and watched television until he fell asleep on the couch. He dreamed of nothing. He suspected nothing. And in 12 days, his entire life would collapse. Because the woman he had humiliated at that checkout line wasn't just a disabled veteran. She wasn't just someone who had survived things he couldn't imagine. She was about to become the last person on Earth he wanted to see. And this time, she wouldn't be carrying a shopping cart. The nightmares came the way they always came. Without warning. Without mercy. Maribel woke at 3:47 a.m., her chest heaving, her hands gripping sheets that were soaked with sweat. The bedroom was dark. The house was silent. But in her mind, the convoy was still burning. Ranger was beside her before her eyes fully opened. The dog had learned years ago to recognize the change in her breathing. The small sound she made before the screaming started. He pressed his weight against her side, heavy and warm and real. I'm here, Maribel whispered. I'm here. I'm okay. She wasn't sure who she was reassuring. The clock on her nightstand glowed red in the darkness. She focused on it, counted backward from 100. Let the numbers replace the images. By the time she reached 47, her heart had slowed. By 23, her hands had stopped shaking. By 1, she was ready to get up. The wheelchair waited beside her bed. She transferred herself into it with practiced efficiency. 12 years of doing this same movement every morning. Her body knew the mechanics, even when her mind was still trapped in the past. The kitchen light came on with a soft click. Ranger padded alongside her, his nails ticking against the hardwood floor. She filled his bowl first, then made herself coffee, then sat at the small table by the window and watched the sky begin to lighten. These hours before dawn were hers. No phone calls, no emails, no meetings, just silence and coffee and the slow return of control. She thought about the store. She thought about Clint Rowe, not with anger. Anger was a luxury she had abandoned years ago. It burned too hot and left too little behind. What she felt instead was something colder, more patient, more precise. Recognition. She had known men like Clint her entire career. Men who mistook volume for authority, who confused fear with respect, who built their power on the backs of people they considered beneath them. She had watched them rise. She had watched them fall. The only variable was timing. On the table beside her coffee cup sat a folder. Inside were 6 months of documentation, complaint records, turnover statistics, exit interview transcripts, security footage timestamps. She had started building this file the first time she visited that store. That visit had been random. A Tuesday afternoon. She needed dog food, and the location was convenient. Nothing more. But she had noticed things. The way the employees flinched when a voice came over the intercom. The way a young cashier apologized 4 times for a problem that wasn't her fault. The way an older stocker avoided the front of the store entirely, timing his breaks to minimize exposure. Small things. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. Maribel was always looking. 31 years in the military taught you to read environments, to notice patterns, to understand that the most dangerous threats rarely announce themselves. After that first visit, she came back, and back, and back. She watched from the parking lot, from the checkout line, from the customer service desk where she filed a complaint about a dented can and observed how the staff responded. She learned the schedules, the hierarchies, the pressure points. She learned about Clint Rowe. His history wasn't hard to find. Public records, social media posts, a military service file that ended abruptly after 8 years. Honorable discharge, but barely. The kind of discharge that meant someone had decided he wasn't worth the paperwork of doing it the other way. He had bounced between jobs after that. Security, retail management, a brief stint in car sales that ended badly. Each position lasted 18 months to 2 years. Each ended with a similar pattern. Complaints, conflicts, quiet departures. But somehow he kept getting hired. That was the part that interested Maribel most. Because Clint Rowe wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom, a product of systems that promoted aggression and punished vulnerability, that valued numbers over people and quarterly results over long-term sustainability. He was what happened when nobody was watching. Maribel had spent the last 4 years making sure someone was always watching. Her official title was Senior Director of Operational Integrity. It was a corporate position created specifically for her, funded by people who understood what she could do. She reported directly to the CEO. She had access to every record, every facility, every employee file in the company. Her job was simple. Find the problems nobody else wanted to find. Fix them. Her methods were her own. She didn't announce inspections. Didn't arrive with entourages. Didn't give managers time to hide their failures or coach their employees. She went in as a customer. She watched. She listened. She documented. And when she had enough evidence, she acted. The store on Riverside Drive had been on her radar for 2 years. The numbers were wrong in ways that took expertise to recognize. Turnover too high, complaints too low, customer satisfaction scores that didn't match the revenue patterns. Something was being manipulated. Something was being hidden. She just needed to see it for herself. The encounter at the checkout line had given her more than she expected. Not just evidence of Clint's behavior, but evidence of the system that enabled him. The silence of the bystanders. The fear in the cashier's eyes. The practiced efficiency of his cruelty. This wasn't a bad day. This was policy. The coffee had gone cold. Maribel pushed the cup aside and opened the folder again. Inside, a single page contained the timeline she had constructed. Every incident, every complaint, every settlement the company had paid to make problems disappear. There had been a lawsuit 2 years ago. A former employee named Darnell Washington. He had accused Clint of racial discrimination and creating a hostile work environment. The company had settled for $75,000. The terms included a non-disclosure agreement and Darnell's agreement to never seek employment with the company again. Clint had received a written warning. Nothing else. That warning was still in his file, yellowed, and forgotten. Nobody had followed up. Nobody had checked to see if the behavior changed. It hadn't. Maribel closed the folder. Outside, the sun had risen. The neighborhood was waking up. A car started somewhere down the street. A dog barked in response. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. But nothing about this morning was ordinary. In 11 days, she would return to that store. Not as a customer. Not as a victim. As the last face Clint Rowe wanted to see. Ranger looked up at her, his head tilted slightly. Almost time, she said. Almost. The dog's tail wagged once. They had waited 6 months for this moment. They could wait 11 more days. What Maribel didn't expect was the phone call that came 3 hours later. The number was internal. Corporate. High priority. Ms. Cross? We have a situation. What kind of situation? A pause. The voice on the other end belonged to Vivian Torres. Compliance. 22 years of experience. Not easily shaken. She sounded shaken now. Someone sent us a package. Documentation about the Riverside store. 18 months of evidence. Maribel felt something cold move through her chest. Who sent it? We don't know. No return address. No fingerprints. Just a note. What does the note say? It says the audit needs to happen sooner. It says there's something we missed. Maribel stared at the folder on her table. The folder she had built over 6 months. Someone else had been watching. The package sat on Vivian Torres's desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. Maribel studied it through the video call on her laptop. The plain manila envelope. The unmarked flash drive. The single sheet of paper with its precise handwriting. Run it again, she said. Vivian clicked through the files. Security footage appeared on screen. Timestamp, 14 months ago. Location, the Riverside store. Loading dock, 11:47 p.m. The footage showed Clint Rowe and another man standing beside a delivery truck. The audio was poor, but their body language was clear. Clint handed something to the man. The man handed something back. Small, rectangular, the size of an envelope. We ran the plates on the truck, Vivian said. It belongs to a vendor we terminated 8 months ago. Officially terminated for quality issues. Unofficially, they were padding invoices, billing us for deliveries that never happened. We caught it during a routine audit and cut ties. And Clint, nobody connected him to it. The paperwork went through a different manager. Someone who quit 3 weeks after we terminated the vendor. Convenient. Very. Maribel leaned back in her wheelchair. Ranger shifted at her feet, responding to the tension in her body. How much did we lose? Based on these records? Between $200,000 and $300,000 over 18 months. Maybe more. The documentation is incomplete. Incomplete how? Vivian hesitated. Whoever sent this wanted us to find enough to act. But they held some things back. Like they're saving them. For what? I don't know. That's what concerns me. Maribel understood the concern. An anonymous source with detailed information and unclear motives was a liability. They could be a whistleblower. They could be a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. They could be someone looking to manipulate the investigation for their own purposes. Or they could be something else entirely. What about the note? Maribel asked. The handwriting. Any analysis? Initial assessment suggests military background. The letter formation is consistent with someone who learned to write in a structured environment. Possibly service academy trained. That detail caught Maribel's attention. Service academy? It's not definitive. Just a probability based on certain characteristics. Maribel thought about Clint's file, his 8 years of service, the people he would have encountered, the enemies he might have made. I want to move the timeline up, she said. The audit happens in 5 days, not 11. That's not enough time to prepare. It's enough time for Clint to find out someone's been documenting him. If that happens, evidence disappears. Employees get pressured. Stories change. She paused. 5 days, Vivian. Make it work. Vivian nodded slowly. I'll need to brief the legal team. Brief them, but keep the circle small. Whoever sent this package knew things they shouldn't know. That means we either have an ally we can't trust or a problem we haven't identified yet. Which do you think it is? Maribel looked at the frozen image on her screen. Clint Rowe, caught in the act of something he thought nobody would ever see. I think someone wants justice, she said. I just don't know if their definition matches ours. The call ended. Maribel sat alone in her kitchen, the morning light now bright through the windows. Ranger had fallen asleep at her feet, his breathing slow and steady. She thought about justice. The word meant different things to different people. For some, it was punishment, pain for pain, an eye for an eye, the satisfaction of watching someone powerful brought low. For others, it was restoration, rebuilding what had been broken, creating systems that prevented future harm. Maribel had learned the hard way that both definitions were incomplete. Justice wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making bad people suffer. It was about creating consequences, making the invisible visible, forcing systems to confront their own failures. Clint Rowe was not the disease. He was the symptom. The disease was a corporate culture that valued results over integrity, that promoted people based on metrics instead of character, that buried complaints instead of addressing them, that paid settlements to make problems disappear instead of solving them. Clint existed because the system allowed him to exist. Removing Clint would create a temporary improvement. Someone else would fill the vacuum. The same patterns would emerge. The same victims would suffer. Real change required something more. It required dismantling the machinery that produced men like Clint in the first place. That was Maribel's actual job. Not firing bad managers. Not punishing individual failures, but identifying the structural weaknesses that allowed those failures to flourish. Rewriting policies, changing incentives, building accountability into processes that had operated for decades without oversight. It was slow work. It was invisible work. Most people never saw it. They saw the dramatic moments, the terminations, the perp walks, the news headlines about corporate scandals and fallen executives. They didn't see the years of documentation, the careful building of evidence, the patient waiting for exactly the right moment to act. Maribel had been building toward this moment for 4 years. The Riverside store was not her first target. It would not be her last, but it represented something important. A test case, a proof of concept. If she could dismantle the system that protected Clint Rowe, she could dismantle others. The phone buzzed again. A text for Vivian. Legal approved. 5 days confirmed. Arriving Monday, 9 a.m. Maribel read the message twice, then deleted it. 5 days. 120 hours. Clint Rowe had 120 hours left of the life he knew. 120 hours of authority. 120 hours of believing he was untouchable. He would spend those hours the way he always did. Intimidating employees. Belittling customers. Building his small empire of fear on the backs of people who couldn't fight back. He would have no idea what was coming. That was exactly how Maribel wanted it. She had spent too many years watching powerful people receive advance warning of consequences, watching them hide evidence and coordinate stories and hire lawyers who specialized in making problems disappear. Not this time. This time, the first warning would be the last warning. This time, the audit would be complete before Clint even understood it had begun. Ranger stirred at her feet, lifting his head as if sensing the shift in her energy. Monday, she said to him. We finished this Monday. The dog's ears perked forward. Outside, the day continued. Cars passed on the street. Birds called from the trees. The ordinary world moved through its ordinary rhythms. But in 5 days, nothing would be ordinary. In 5 days, A store assistant manager would learn that the woman he had humiliated at a checkout line was not what she appeared to be. He would learn that power doesn't always announce itself. He would learn that the quietest people in the room are sometimes the most dangerous. And by then, it would be far too late to do anything about it. The anonymous package still bothered her. Someone was watching her watch Clint. Someone knew things they shouldn't know. Someone wanted this to happen just as badly as she did. The question was why, and what they planned to do once it was done. Monday morning arrived with a cold rain that turned the parking lot into a mirror. Clint Rowe pulled into his reserved space at 7:43 a.m., 17 minutes before his shift officially began. He liked arriving early. It gave him time to walk the floor before the employees expected him, to catch them in small failures, to remind them who was watching. The store was quiet at this hour. Just the overnight crew finishing their stocking and the morning shift trickling in through the employee entrance. The fluorescent lights hummed their constant song. The air smelled like floor cleaner and refrigeration. Clint poured himself coffee in the break room. Black. No sugar. He scrolled through his phone while he drank, checking sports scores and ignoring 3 missed calls from his ex-wife. At 8:15, he began his walkthrough. Produce first. He found a bruised apple in the display and made sure the produce manager saw him throw it away. Then dairy, where he noted a temperature reading that was half a degree above optimal. Then frozen foods, where a stock boy named Terrence was leaning against a freezer door instead of working. Problem, Terrence? The young man straightened immediately. No, sir. Just catching my breath. Catch on your own time. This is my time. Yes, sir. Clint moved on, satisfied. By 8:45, he had documented 4 violations and issued 2 verbal warnings. A productive morning. The kind of morning that reminded everyone why he was in charge. He was standing near the customer service desk at 8:52 when his phone buzzed. Text from Patricia, regional coordinator. Corporate team arriving within the hour. Routine audit. Be available. Clint read the message and felt nothing. He had survived a dozen audits. Passed every one. The trick was confidence. Look them in the eye. Answer their questions directly. Show them numbers that matched expectations. He had good numbers. Turnover was high, but he explained that as market conditions. Customer complaints were low because he handled them personally, which meant they never made it into the official system. Shrinkage was acceptable. Revenue was up 3% over the previous year. On paper, the Riverside store was a success story. On paper, he texted back, ready when they are. Then he finished his coffee and went straight in his office. The audit team arrived at 9:07 a.m. 3 people walked through the front entrance. 2 men in suits that looked expensive, but not flashy. Corporate legal and HR, based on their posture and the way they scanned the environment without appearing to look at anything. Between them, a woman in a wheelchair. Clint was near the registers when he saw them enter. He registered the wheelchair first, then the German shepherd walking beside it, then the military cap, the olive jacket. Something cold moved through his stomach. He knew that dog. He knew that wheelchair. The recognition didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like water seeping through a crack. The checkout line, the raised voice, the finger pointed in her face. 2 weeks ago. It had been 2 weeks ago. The woman stopped near the entrance, speaking quietly to one of the suited men. He nodded and gestured toward the customer service desk. Toward Clint. She turned. Their eyes met across 40 feet of retail space. Maribel crossed and smiled. Didn't frown. Didn't give him anything to read. She simply looked at him. And in that look, Clint Rowe felt something he hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. The district manager appeared from somewhere, moving faster than Clint had ever seen him move. Gerald Patterson, 15 years with the company, usually calm to the point of boredom. He wasn't calm now. Ms. Cross, he said, slightly out of breath. We weren't expecting you personally. We thought. I prefer to conduct certain audits myself, she said. Her voice was the same. Calm. Measured. Is there a conference room we can use? Of course. Right this way. Gerald led them past the registers, past the customer service desk, past Clint. He didn't introduce them. Didn't even look at his assistant manager. That was wrong. Gerald always introduced Clint to corporate visitors, always positioned him as the operational backbone of the store, always made sure his contributions were visible. This time, nothing. Clint watched them disappear down the hallway toward the back offices. The dog walked beside the wheelchair with that same controlled stillness he remembered. The woman didn't look back. Something was very wrong. He pulled out his phone and texted Gerald. "What's going on? Who is that?" No response. He waited 5 minutes. 10. 15. Still nothing. At 9:34, his phone finally buzzed. But it wasn't Gerald. It was Patricia. "Corporate wants you available for interview at 11 a.m. Don't leave the building." Interview. Not meeting. Not discussion. Interview. The words sat in his chest like a stone. Clint walked to his office and closed the door. He sat down at his desk and tried to remember everything about the incident 2 weeks ago. The checkout line. The old woman. The things he had said. The things witnesses might have heard. He had been angry. He remembered that. The line was slow, and she was in the way, and he had lost his temper. It happened sometimes. Customers provoked him. They were rude, entitled, disrespectful. Someone had to put them in their place. That's all it was. A moment of frustration. A temporary loss of control. Nothing that should matter 2 weeks later. But the way that woman had looked at him, like she already knew everything, like she had been waiting. At 10:15, Carolyn from the bread aisle knocked on his door. "Mr. Rowe? They want to talk to me." "The corporate people." "About what?" "They didn't say. Just asked me to come to the conference room." Clint studied her face. Carolyn had worked here 11 years. She was loyal, quiet, the kind of employee who kept her head down and did her job. "What are you going to tell them?" She didn't answer right away. That hesitation told him everything. "Whatever they ask, I guess." She walked away before he could respond. At 10:47, Destiny knocked on his door. At 11:12, Jerome. At 11:38, Terrence. One by one, his employees were being pulled into that conference room. One by one, they returned to the floor with expressions he couldn't read. Nobody would look at him. The stone in his chest had become a boulder. At 12:15, Gerald finally emerged from the hallway. His face was gray. His hands trembled slightly as he walked toward Clint's office. "They want to see you now," he said. "What's happening, Gerald? What is this about?" Gerald shook his head slowly. "I can't discuss it. Just go talk to them, Clint." He turned and walked away without another word. Clint stood up, straightened his name tag, smoothed his shirt. He walked down the hallway toward the conference room where his future waited. The door was closed. He knocked once. A voice from inside. "Come in." He opened the door. The woman from the checkout line sat at the head of the table. The German shepherd lay at her feet. The two suited men flanked her on either side, laptops open, faces neutral. On the table in front of her, a folder. Thick, organized, filled with documents he couldn't quite see from the doorway. "Sit down, Mr. Rowe," she said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Calm, measured, gentle, terrifying. "We have a lot to discuss." Clinton Marcus Rowe. Maribel spoke his full name like she was reading a death certificate. Clint froze halfway into the chair. His legs locked. His hands gripped the armrest before he even sat down. The sound of his complete government name, a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in years, hit him like a physical blow. "How do you know my—" "Sit down, Mr. Rowe." He sat. The conference room felt smaller than it should have. The walls pressed inward. The fluorescent light above buzzed at a frequency that made his teeth ache. The two men in suits watched him with expressions that revealed nothing. But it was the woman who commanded the space. She sat at the head of the table like she had been born there. The wheelchair didn't diminish her. If anything, it amplified something, made her stillness feel intentional, powerful. The German shepherd at her feet hadn't moved since Clint entered. The dog's eyes tracked him with the patience of a predator who had already eaten. Maribel opened the folder in front of her. "Let's begin with the incident on December 10th of last year. Employee name, Darnell Washington. Position, overnight stalker. Duration of employment, 7 months. Clint's throat tightened. That was settled. The company. The company paid $75,000 to avoid litigation. Mr. Washington signed a non-disclosure agreement. You received a written warning that was never followed up on. She turned a page. The warning stated that any future incidents of similar nature would result in immediate termination. There haven't been any future incidents. I have 46 documented complaints that suggest otherwise. The number landed like a hammer. 46. Clint opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Maribel continued without looking up. 22 complaints from customers regarding verbal abuse, intimidation, or discriminatory language. 18 complaints from employees regarding hostile work environment, retaliation, or harassment. 6 complaints from vendors regarding threatening behavior during delivery disputes. She closed the folder and finally looked at him. Every single one of these complaints was marked resolved in our system. Would you like to explain how you resolved 46 complaints without a single documented corrective action? I handle them personally. That's my job. Customer service. Your job is to ensure this store operates within company policy and federal law. Your job is not to bury evidence of your own misconduct. Clint felt heat rising in his face. The old anger. The familiar response to being challenged. Now, wait a minute. I don't know who you think you are, but my name is Maribel Cross. She said it simply, without emphasis. I'm the Senior Director of Operational Integrity for this company. I report directly to the CEO. I have been investigating this location for 6 months. The words hit him one at a time. Senior Director, Operational Integrity. 6 months. You've been investigating? I have been documenting a pattern of abuse that has persisted under your supervision for over 3 years. I have security footage, employee testimonies, customer statements, financial records that suggest collusion with terminated vendors. She paused. I also have my own personal experience of your behavior. 2 weeks ago, check out lane 4. The memory crashed back. The wheelchair, the dog, the things he had said. You people always want special treatment. What did you do to deserve all this? He had said those things to her face, while she was already building a case that would end his career. I didn't know. You didn't know I was your superior. That's correct. Maribel's voice remained steady. You assumed I was a helpless old woman who couldn't fight back. You assumed my disability made me weak. You assumed no one was watching. She leaned forward slightly. You assumed wrong. One of the suited men, the one from legal, cleared his throat. Mr. Rowe, we need to inform you that this meeting is being recorded. Anything you say may be used in subsequent disciplinary or legal proceedings. You have the right to have union representation present if you choose. I'm not in a union. Then we'll proceed. Maribel pulled another document from the folder. This one had the company letterhead at the top. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties pending the completion of this investigation. Your access credentials have been deactivated. Your company email has been archived. You're not to contact any employee of this location or any other company location until further notice. You can't do this. I've worked here for 6 years. My numbers are good. Revenue is up. The store runs. The store runs on fear, Mr. Rowe. Maribel's voice cut through his protest like a blade. Employee turnover at this location is 240% higher than the company average. Customer complaints, the ones that actually reach corporate, are 60% higher. Shrinkage has increased every quarter for 3 years despite your reported numbers. She placed the document on the table between them. This store is failing, and you are the reason. Clint stared at the paper, at the words that would change everything. His hands shook slightly as he reached for it. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. It is happening, and it's happening because you made choices. Every complaint you buried, every employee you intimidated, every customer you humiliated. She paused. Every veteran you mocked because you thought their wheelchair made them less than human. The room went silent. Ranger shifted at Maribel's feet, the first movement the dog had made since Clint entered. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it drew Clint's attention downward. The dog was watching him, not with aggression, with something worse. Patience. What happens now? Clint's voice came out smaller than he intended. Now we interview the rest of your staff. We review every piece of documentation from the past 3 years. We determine the full scope of the damage you've caused. Maribel gathered the folder and placed it beside her. And then we decide whether this matter stays internal or goes to the authorities. Authorities? For what? Fraud, Mr. Rowe. The vendor payments. The falsified complaint records. The disability discrimination. She tilted her head slightly. Did you think none of that was illegal? He had no answer. Outside the conference room, the store continued its ordinary operations. Registers beeped. Customers moved through aisles. Employees worked their shifts. None of them knew what was happening in this room, but they would. Maribel pressed a button on the phone in front of her. Send in the next employee, please. The door opened. Carolyn from the bread aisle stepped inside. Her eyes moved from Maribel to Clint to the suited man. She took a seat at the far end of the table, as far from Clint as possible. She didn't look at him. Not once. Mr. Rowe, you're dismissed for now. Please wait in the employee break room until we call for you again. Clint stood slowly. His legs felt disconnected from his body. The walk to the door took forever. His hand reached for the handle. Mr. Rowe. He turned. Maribel was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. When you spoke to me at that checkout line, you asked what I did to deserve all this. She gestured at the wheelchair, at Ranger, at herself. I spent 31 years serving this country. I survived things you cannot imagine. I rebuilt myself from nothing, and I dedicated the rest of my life to making sure people like you never hurt anyone again. She paused. That's what I did. Clint walked out of the room. The door closed behind him, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered what he already knew. This was only the beginning. Carolyn's hands trembled as she spoke. The first time I saw him make someone cry was my third week. A customer, older gentleman, confused about a return policy. The legal representative typed steadily on his laptop. The HR director took notes by hand. Maribel listened without interrupting. Mr. Rowe called him senile, in front of everyone. The man just stood there, shaking. His wife had to lead him out. Did you report this incident? I tried. I went to Gerald, Mr. Patterson, and told him what happened. He said he'd handle it. And did he? Carolyn shook her head slowly. Nothing changed. A week later, Clint made a joke about it in the break room. Said he was just helping clear out the deadweight. The words landed heavily in the quiet room. Ranger shifted at Maribel's feet. The dog had heard hours of testimony now. Statement after statement. Voice after voice. Each one adding another layer to a picture that grew darker with every word. How long have you worked here, Carolyn? 11 years. Since the store opened. And in that time, how many employees have you seen leave because of Mr. Rowe's behavior? Carolyn looked at the ceiling, counting silently. At least 30, maybe more. People just stop showing up, or they transfer to other locations, or they find reasons to quit. Has anyone ever been fired for complaining about him? A long pause. There was a girl, Destiny's cousin, worked here about 2 years ago. She filed a formal complaint about Clint touching her shoulder without permission. Kept doing it even after she asked him to stop. What happened to her complaint? It disappeared, and she got written up for attendance issues she didn't have. 3 write-ups in 2 weeks. Then she was terminated. The HR director stopped writing. Do you remember her name? Tamika Reynolds. The name went into the record. Another thread to pull. Another pattern to document. Maribel made a note on her own pad. The handwriting was precise. Military trained. Is there anything else you want to tell us, Carolyn? Anything at all? Carolyn's eyes moved to the closed door, to the hallway where Clint was presumably waiting. Her jaw tightened. There's a folder. In his office. Bottom drawer of his desk. He thinks nobody knows about it. What kind of folder? Photos. Notes. Things he's collected on employees over the years. Things he uses when someone gets out of line. She swallowed hard. He showed it to me once. After I complained about him yelling at a customer. He said if I ever went to corporate again, everyone would see what was in my file. The temperature in the room dropped. What was in your file? Medical records. From when I had my surgery 3 years ago. I don't know how he got them, but he had them. And he said if I made trouble, he'd make sure everyone knew about my condition. Maribel's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. Thank you, Carolyn. You've been very helpful. The woman stood to leave, then stopped at the door. Miss Cross, is something actually going to happen this time? Or is this just going to disappear like everything else? Something is going to happen. How do you know? Maribel looked at her directly. Because I'm the one who decides what disappears. And this isn't going anywhere. Carolyn nodded once. Then she walked out. The interviews continued for 5 more hours. Destiny came in and described watching Clint berate a developmentally disabled customer for counting coins too slowly. Jerome came in and described being called boy during a performance review despite being 47 years old. Terrence came in and described being told he was lucky to have this job every time he asked about scheduling accommodations for his college classes. Marcus from Frozen Foods described being mocked for his stutter until he stopped speaking in meetings entirely. Shanice, who had only worked there 2 weeks, described already looking for another job because the vibe in this place is wrong and everyone knows it. Each story was different. Each story was the same. A man with small power wielded it like a weapon against people who couldn't fight back. By 4 p.m., the picture was complete. Maribel sat alone in the conference room for a long moment after the last interview ended. The legal and HR representatives had stepped out to make calls. Ranger lay at her feet, patient as always. The folder from Clint's desk sat on the table in front of her. They had retrieved it during the interviews. 17 employee files, each one containing information that should never have been in a supervisor's possession. Medical records, personal photos, notes about family situations, financial difficulties, immigration status. Leverage, pure and simple. He had built a machine for control, a system of fear backed by the threat of exposure. And he had operated it for years while the company looked the other way. Not anymore. Maribel's phone buzzed. A text from Vivian at corporate. Legal has reviewed the vendor evidence. They're recommending criminal referral. She read the message twice, then typed a response. Proceed. The door opened. The HR director stepped back in, his face grave. We have a problem. What kind of problem? District Manager Patterson. He's been signing off on Roe's complaint resolutions for 3 years. Every buried complaint has his authorization code. Maribel felt nothing. She had suspected this from the beginning. Systems of abuse never survived without institutional support. Where's Patterson now? He left the building 20 minutes ago. Said he had a family emergency. His credentials? Still active. Deactivate them. Now. The HR director nodded and pulled out his phone. Maribel looked at Ranger. The dog's ears had perked forward, sensing the shift in energy. It's bigger than we thought, she said quietly. It always is. The investigation had just expanded beyond one man, beyond one store, into the infrastructure itself. And somewhere in this city, a district manager was running. The call came at 6:47 p.m. Gerald Patterson's company car had been found in the parking lot of a motel 12 miles outside city limits. Engine still running. Driver's side door open. No sign of Gerald. Maribel received the news while reviewing documentation in the conference room. The legal team had gone quiet on the other end of the phone. Nobody knew what to say. Has anyone contacted his family? His wife says she hasn't heard from him since this morning. She's filed a missing persons report. And his access? Deactivated 3 hours ago. But before that, he downloaded several files from the corporate server. We're still determining what he took. Maribel closed her eyes for a moment. The situation had grown beyond a single store audit. It had become something larger, something that would require more resources, more attention, more consequences. Pull the security footage from this location. Every camera. Last 48 hours. I want to know who Gerald talked to before he left. Understood. The call ended. Ranger lifted his head from his paws, watching her with those steady brown eyes. Complications, she said to him. There are always complications. She wheeled herself to the window that overlooked the sales floor. The store was still operating, though the mood had shifted. Employees moved more carefully, spoke more quietly, glanced toward the back hallway where the conference room door remained closed. They knew something was happening. They just didn't know how big it was. At 7:15 p.m., the corporate executive team made their decision. The call came from the CEO directly. A woman named Lorraine Foster, who had been with the company for 30 years and had personally approved Maribel's position 4 years ago. I've reviewed everything, Lorraine said. The scope of this is beyond what any of us anticipated. Yes, Patterson being involved changes things. If a district manager was complicit, we need to examine every location in his territory. Agreed. I'm authorizing an expanded investigation. Every store Patterson supervised, every complaint that crossed his desk, every personnel decision he approved. Maribel felt the weight of the words. This was no longer about one bully in one store. This was about a system, a culture, a rot that had spread through layers of management while everyone looked the other way. What about Rowe? The evidence is clear. Terminate him immediately. We'll let legal handle the criminal referral separately. I'll handle it personally. A pause on the line. Are you sure? Given your personal involvement in the incident. I'm sure. He needs to understand that the person he underestimated is the same person who ended his career. That matters. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Then, do what you need to do. The call ended. Maribel looked at Ranger. One more conversation, she said. Then we're done with him. She wheeled herself toward the break room. The hallway felt longer than before. Quieter. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on the linoleum floor. Somewhere in the distance, a refrigeration unit hummed its endless note. The break room door was closed. She knocked once, then opened it. Clint Rose sat alone at a table in the corner. His hands were wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. His name tag was still pinned to his shirt, though it hung slightly crooked now. His face had aged 10 years in the past 8 hours. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clint laughed. A short, bitter sound. Come to finish me off? I've come to inform you that your employment with this company has been terminated effective immediately. You will receive your final paycheck via direct deposit. Your personal belongings will be boxed and available for pickup at the front entrance. You are not to enter any company property after tonight. She said it without emotion, without satisfaction, just facts. Clint stared at her. That's it. After 6 years, that's all I get. You also need to know that the evidence collected during this investigation will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities. The vendor fraud, the falsified records, the disability discrimination. You may be contacted by law enforcement in the coming days. His face went pale. You can't prove any of that. We already have. He stood up suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor. Ranger rose to his feet in response, positioning himself between Clint and Maribel's wheelchair. This is wrong. This is all wrong. His voice cracked. I serve this country. I gave everything to this job, and you're going to destroy my life because of a few complaints. Maribel didn't move. You destroyed your own life, Mr. Rowe. Every choice you made led you here. Every person you humiliated. Every employee you threatened. Every customer you degraded. She paused. Every disabled veteran you mocked because you thought they were beneath you. I didn't know who you were. That's exactly the point. She let the words settle. You treated me like garbage because you thought I was powerless. You treated dozens of others the same way. The only difference is that I had the resources to do something about it. Clint's hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Ranger growled. Low. Controlled. A warning. The sound cut through whatever Clint had been building toward. He took a step back, his face crumbling. What am I supposed to do now? Maribel looked at him for a long moment. This man who had caused so much pain, who had built his identity on the suffering of others, who was now facing the consequences of choices he had made every single day for years. That's not my concern, she said. But I suggest you start by becoming someone worth respecting. She turned her wheelchair toward the door. Security will escort you out. She didn't look back. In the hallway, 2 uniformed officers were waiting. Store security, called in from the district office. They nodded at Maribel as she passed. He's ready, she said. They entered the break room. Maribel continued down the hallway, Ranger walking steadily at her side. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of voices, the sound of footsteps, the quiet exit of a man who had once believed he was untouchable. No shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic scene. Just the simple, efficient removal of a problem that should have been addressed years ago. She reached the front of the store as Clint was being led through the employee entrance at the back. Nobody saw him go. Nobody would remember him leaving. That felt right. Some endings don't deserve an audience. The store closed at 10 p.m. Maribel remained in the conference room, finishing the documentation that would be filed with corporate by morning. The legal team had left hours ago, their work complete for now. The HR director had gone home to his family. Even the overnight security had settled into their usual routines. But she wasn't ready to leave. Ranger lay at her feet, his breathing slow and steady. The old dog had earned his rest. 12 hours of vigilance. 12 hours of watching her back. She reached down and scratched behind his ears. "Good boy," she whispered. He thumped his tail once against the floor. Outside the conference room, the store had grown quiet. The registers were dark. The aisles were empty. Only the emergency lights remained on, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Maribel gathered her papers and wheeled herself out of the room. The hallway felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the air itself had changed. She moved through the back offices, past the break room where Clint had received his fate, past the manager's office that would remain empty until a replacement was found. She emerged onto the sales floor. The checkout lanes stretched before her like rows of soldiers standing at ease. Lane 4 was on her right, the same lane where it had all begun. She wheeled herself toward it. The conveyor belt was still. The scanner was silent. The small bagging area where Clint had invaded her space sat empty and unremarkable. Just a checkout lane. Just a place where ordinary people bought ordinary things. But 2 weeks ago, this spot had been a battlefield. A place where dignity was attacked and defended. Where assumptions were made and shattered. Where a man learned nothing and a woman decided everything. Maribel rested her hand on the edge of the counter. She thought about the employees who would come to work tomorrow. Carolyn, who would no longer have to fear exposure. Jerome, who would no longer be called boy. Destiny, who would no longer watch customers be humiliated without consequences. The store would function differently now. Not perfectly. No workplace was perfect. But the source of the poison had been removed. The system that protected it had been exposed. The people who had suffered in silence finally knew that someone had listened. That mattered. It wasn't justice in a grand sense. Nobody would write songs about what happened here. No monuments would be built. The world would continue spinning exactly as it had before. But for the people in this building, everything had changed. Sometimes that was enough. Ranger pressed his head against her thigh. "I know," she said. "Time to go." She wheeled toward the exit, past the darkened aisles, past the produce section, past the bread display where Carolyn had worked for 11 years under the shadow of a man who collected secrets. The automatic doors slid open. Cold night air rushed in. Maribel stopped just outside, looking back at the store one last time. The fluorescent lights still glowed through the windows. The open sign had switched to closed hours ago, but the building itself remained lit, waiting for morning, waiting for the next day to begin. Tomorrow, there would be announcements, staff meetings, new policies explained, and new expectations set. Tomorrow, the process of rebuilding would start. Tonight, it was only quiet. And that was enough. A car pulled into the parking lot. Maribel watched as it approached, curious despite herself. The store was closed. There was no reason for anyone to be here. The car stopped 20 feet away. The driver's door opened. A young woman stepped out. She was in her late 20s, wearing a plain jacket and carrying a folder pressed against her chest. Her face was uncertain but determined. She walked toward Maribel with the careful steps of someone who wasn't sure of her welcome. "Ms. Cross." "Yes. My name is Tamika Reynolds. I used to work here." The name triggered recognition. Destiny's cousin. The woman who had filed a complaint about inappropriate touching and been terminated on fabricated grounds. "I know who you are," Maribel said. "Your case is part of the investigation." Tamika nodded slowly. "I heard what happened today. Word travels fast in this town." She looked at the store, at the dark windows, and the empty parking lot. "I wanted to see it for myself. There's nothing to see. Just a building. It's not just a building to me." Tamika's voice trembled slightly. "I spent 18 months here. Worked hard. Did everything right. And they destroyed me anyway." She held out the folder. "I kept everything. Every document. Every email. Every note from every meeting where they made me feel like I was the problem. Her chin lifted slightly. I thought maybe someday someone would care. Maribel took the folder, felt the weight of it. The years of evidence preserved against all odds by a woman who refused to give up. Someone cares now, she said. Tamika's eyes glistened. Is it over? Really over? For Clint, yes. For this store, yes. Maribel paused. But the work isn't done. There are other stores, other managers, other people who need someone to listen. What happens next? We keep going. We find the problems. We fix what we can. We build systems that make it harder for people like Clint to thrive. She met Tamika's eyes. And we don't stop. Tamika was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. Small, fragile, but real. Thank you. She turned and walked back to her car. The engine started. The headlights swept across the parking lot. And then she was gone, disappearing into the night. Maribel looked down at Ranger. Let's go home, she said. They moved together toward her van. The lift whirred as it lowered. She wheeled herself aboard. Ranger jumped in beside her. The doors closed. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, looking through the windshield at the store. Order had been restored, not with drama, not with violence, not with speeches or celebrations, just with patience, evidence, and a quiet refusal to look away. She started the engine. The parking lot lights reflected off the wet pavement as she drove toward the exit. Behind her, the store faded into the distance. Tomorrow, it would open again, and for the first time in years, the people inside would feel safe. Chapter 10. 3 weeks later, the rain returned. Maribel sat in her kitchen, coffee growing cold in her hands, watching drops streak down the window glass. Ranger lay on his bed in the corner, older than he'd been at the start of all this, more gray in his muzzle, but still present, still loyal. The investigation had expanded exactly as predicted. Gerald Patterson had resurfaced 5 days after his disappearance, claiming confusion and personal stress. His resignation was accepted without ceremony. The files he downloaded were recovered and added to the evidence being compiled for potential criminal charges. For other stores in his district were now under review. 3 more managers had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. A corporate-wide policy revision was underway, creating new reporting structures designed to prevent the burial of complaints. An anonymous tip line had been established. Training programs were being developed. The machine was changing. Slowly. Imperfectly, but changing. Maribel's phone sat on the table beside her. That morning, she had received a call from Lorraine Foster. A brief conversation. Professional but warm. The board is pleased with the outcome, Lorraine had said. You've exposed problems we didn't know we had. Saved us from liabilities we couldn't have survived. I was just doing my job. You were doing much more than that. And we both know it. There had been talk of recognition. A commendation of some kind. Perhaps a promotion to a newly created position with even broader authority. Maribel had asked for time to think about it. She wasn't sure she wanted broader authority. What she wanted was simpler. She wanted to know that the people she helped would be safe. That the changes being implemented would last longer than the next quarterly earnings report. That the system would remember why these reforms mattered. She had seen too many changes fade. Too many promises forgotten. Too many organizations that talked about values while practicing something else entirely. Time would tell if this was different. Ranger shifted on his bed, groaning slightly as old joints protested the movement. Maribel looked at him. You've earned a rest, she said. Maybe we both have. The dog's tail wagged once. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Rest was for people who believed the work was finished. And the work was never finished. Her laptop was open on the table. On the screen, a report from a store 3 states away. Different company, different industry. Same pattern. High turnover, low complaints, numbers that didn't match the reality on the ground. Someone had sent her the report anonymously. Someone who knew what she did and how she did it. The same someone, perhaps, who had sent that original package that accelerated the Riverside investigation. She still didn't know who they were. Still didn't know their motives. But they were out there, watching, documenting, waiting for the right moment to act. Maybe that was enough. Maybe justice didn't require a single hero. Maybe it required a network. A system of people who refused to look away. Who collected evidence in secret. who preserved records against all odds, who waited for someone with the authority to make things change. Tamika Reynolds had been one of those people. The anonymous sender was another. And Maribel was one more. She closed the laptop. Outside, the rain was letting up. Patches of blue appeared between the clouds. The world was moving on, as it always did, toward whatever came next. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant at corporate. New location flag for review. Similar patterns to Riverside. Details attached. She read the message twice. Then opened the attachment. Another store. Another manager with a history of complaints. Another group of employees suffering in silence. Another community that deserved better than what they were getting. Ranger lifted his head, watching her. "One more," she said to him. "There's always one more." The dog rose from his bed, stretching slowly, deliberately. He walked to her side and pressed his head against her thigh. Ready, as always, as he had been for 11 years. Maribel placed her hand on his head. She thought about Clint Rowe, wherever he was now. About the life he had built on fear and the ruins he was left with. About whether he would learn from what happened or whether he would simply find another place to exercise his small cruelties. She thought about the employees at the Riverside store, waking up each morning without the weight of dread. About Carolyn returning to work without a folder hanging over her head. About Jerome speaking in meetings again. About Tamika, who had kept fighting even when no one was listening. She thought about all the people she would never meet. The ones suffering right now in stores and offices and warehouses across the country. The ones being mocked and threatened and diminished by people who had never faced consequences. The ones waiting for someone to care. She couldn't save them all, but she could save some of them. And some was better than none. Maribel stood, or rather, she positioned herself to move. Her wheelchair was her vehicle now, had been for 12 years, would be for whatever years remained. It didn't make her less. It made her different. Different wasn't the same as broken. "Let's go, Ranger," she said. "We have work to do." The dog walked beside her to the door. She paused there, looking back at her kitchen. At the coffee growing cold. At the window where the rain had finally stopped. This house had seen her through the worst years of her life. The surgeries, the depression, the long nights when she wondered if she would ever feel whole again. But she had survived. More than that, she had built something. A purpose, a mission, a reason to get up each morning and face whatever the world threw at her. That was worth protecting. Maribel opened the door. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds. The air smelled clean, washed fresh by the rain. Ranger stepped onto the porch beside her. Together, they moved toward whatever came next. Because somewhere out there, another bully was abusing their power. Another victim was suffering in silence. Another store was failing its people while the numbers looked fine on paper. And Maribel Cross was ready. She had been ready for a long time. The Riverside store was not her last stop. It was just the beginning. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story of justice and redemption. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed someone being mistreated and wished you could do something about it? Share your experience. Your words might inspire someone else to stand up. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it with them. Sometimes the reminder that justice exists is enough to keep hope alive. Until next time, remember, power isn't about what you can take from others. It's about what you give back.